This section continues the prior discussion on market size and quality, with a focus on matters of importance to branded drug launches. This chart shows the impact of the price a country pays for drugs with the number of launches and the lag in getting those drugs. On the left you see the United States with the world's highest drug prices, and Portugal with the lowest, as shown by the gray bars. The black dots indicate the number of launches of the globally available drugs in that country. Once again, the United States has the most available drugs, and Portugal has the fewest available drugs. And the white dots show the average lag, with the United States having the lowest lag in the world, meaning it gets drugs fastest after they've been approved in any other country, and Portugal having the longest lag in the world, meaning they wait longest after the drug's been first approved in any country. So there's a correlation between the prices paid in a country and how fast they get drugs, and also how many of the globally available drugs that country gets. This suggests that drug companies target countries like the United States first and lower paying countries later in their launch strategies. The next topic I want to discuss is estimating market size. For a new drug, if there are similar drugs already on the market, then estimates tend to be based on the performance of the existing drugs, noting any special differences, such as dosage form or side effect profiles or efficacy, between the new drug and the existing drugs. First-in-class drugs are a lot more complicated. Estimating market size for first-in-class drugs might involve looking at the alternatives which patients are taking right now, or similar in whatever way you can define first-in-class drugs in any other category. Importantly, both low estimates and high estimates can be damaging, and I'll go over a couple of case studies. The first is Exubera, which is a case of overestimating market size. It's known that the insulin market is a mature market and a very large market. Nektar Therapeutics developed the first inhalable version of insulin with projected annual sales of $2 to $3 billion. It's worth noting that it took 6 years of clinical trials for this delivery system to be approved, which should raise caution. Ultimately, the drug failed to meet sales expectations and was pulled from the market. Some of the possible reasons are that the long-term effects of protein administration via the lungs were unknown at the time, and so patients might have been reluctant to take the drug, and physicians likewise reluctant to prescribe the drug. There's also a risk for the parties involved in marketing and selling the drugs, because the drug recall and tort lawsuits, due to adverse side effects, could have posed serious financial risks, possibly bankrupting all the companies involved. The next example is Enbrel, which is a case of underestimating market size. Enbrel was a first-in-class drug for rheumatoid arthritis, and as I mentioned before, it can be difficult to assess the market size for first-in-class drugs. Immunix, the developer, was overly pessimistic in projecting patient dropout, thinking that patients would take the drug initially and then stop taking it after a short period of time. The drug ultimately set a 24-month sales growth record. Immunix had to resort to rationing the drug, and ultimately their inability to fully leverage the drug popularity because they didn't have sufficient manufacturing capacity led to their acquisition. Moving on, some of the other things which need to be considered in evaluating which drugs to launch and how many resources to put behind them are the market protection and competition for that drug. So I mentioned before compound patents and how they're very strong. So if patent compounds exist with a long protected life remaining for a drug in development, then it should be favorable to develop that drug. If the patents are soon to expire, then the case for that drug would be weaker. It's also worthwhile looking at other types of patents, such as production patents and method of use patents, which can build a broader scope of protection around a drug. It's also worth looking at regulatory exclusivity. Whether a drug is in a special category, such as an antibiotic or an orphan drug, and eligible for special regulatory protections. And beyond that, there are other ways in which companies can protect their drugs, such as through control of supply chains. It's also worth noting the strategic alignment for a drug. Large companies might ask themselves, is the market for this drug large enough? And if not, perhaps it's better to sell the drug in development to a smaller company who would be better positioned to capitalize on it. For small companies, they can similarly ask themselves, is the market accessible? If it's too large of a market, perhaps you'd be better off partnering with a large company with a larger sales force than trying to reach the market all by themselves. It's also common for companies to specialize in certain categories, such as certain dosage forms, whether they're oral dosage forms, injectable dosage forms, transdermal patches, or what have you. So how do the dosage forms for a potential drug in development align with the company's expertise? I mentioned the sales channels before, and it's worth asking whether the sales channels for a drug in development align with existing relationships. Finally, does a company have relationships with key stakeholders? For example, if a drug's in a therapeutic area where a company already has several well-selling drugs, then they can use their reputation in that market to help drive the new drug. So having discussed the various factors which branded companies consider in evaluating which drugs to launch, it's also important to look at the factors which branded companies look at in lifecycle management and protecting their branded drugs. Shown here are the sales revenues for Lipitor decreasing after patents expired, and the sales revenues for atorvastatin, the generic version of the drug, rising sharply at the same time. With many drugs earning billions of dollars in annual sales, and such sharp revenue erosion happening very quickly after patent expiration, there's many strategies which branded companies use to extend the marketability of their branded drugs. It's worth noting, however, that overly aggressive tactics may result in punitive damages and even in criminal charges against company management. One of the common strategies employed by branded companies is strategic prices. The company may elect to drop the price of the branded drug to provide reduced incentive for generics to enter the market, or it's not uncommon for branded prices to rise as generics enter and to maximize revenues from the patients who elect to take the branded drug even as the generic becomes available. Branding, as we saw with the Nexium purple pill, is especially valuable for over-the-counter drugs. Branded companies may also look for new indications of the drugs as the key patents expire. However, this does introduce the risk of generics entering with skinny labels, as I mentioned before, and hoping for off-label prescription into those uses. Another strategy is for branded companies to look for new formulations of drugs, such as extended release formulations to improve the patient experience, or new dosage forms to improve adherence. For example, many geriatric patients have trouble swallowing pills, so transdermal forms of the pill may be preferable. Or likewise, switching from multiple pills a day to one pill a day, or maybe one pill every few days, may help set a brand apart from the generic alternatives. Another strategy is to develop new combinations of drugs. And a note here is that in developing a new combination, it's vital for the brand to demonstrate non-obviousness in order for that combination to be patented. And I use here the example of Symbyax, which is a combination of two existing drugs, and in their patent they mention that the drug treats refractory depression without weight gain, which is typically observed in such treatment, which confers a marked and unexpected benefit on the patient. Another famous example is the Nexium switch, which involved purification of the enantiomers of the drug. Prilosec, which preceded Nexium, is two mirror image forms of the same chemical. On the left you see esomeprazole, and on the right you see omeprazole. The difference between the two drugs can be seen in the shape of the lines around the sulfur atom in the middle of the molecule, showing a difference in shape despite having the same chemical formula. By purifying just the active form, or esomeprazole, Nexium was developed, and as you can see from the sales revenues, as sales revenues for Prilosec dropped, sales revenues for Nexium picked up. One of the keys in this strategy was convincing payers that Nexium had better benefits than the generic version of Prilosec. Continuing the case study of Prilosec, another strategy used was to develop an over-the-counter version of the drug to improve convenience for patients and provide yet another reason to use the branded drug over the generics. Importantly, if over-the-counter approval requires new chemical testing, then the over-the-counter version of the drug may be eligible for 3 years of new clinical investigation exclusivity. Authorized generics are another strategy which can be used by branded firms to fight generic entrants. As I mentioned before, the first generic to successfully file a paragraph certification or a patent challenge can win 180 days of generic exclusivity. However, the brand may counter by licensing a third party to sell a generically labeled version of their branded drug under their existing approval. Because the drug comes off the same manufacturing line as the branded drug, but is sold with a generic label, buyers tend to prefer authorized generics to ordinary generics, so this strategy can put pricing pressure on the generic entrant.
Ask me anything. Here's my email address, yelly@drugpatentwatch.com. I look forward to your questions and comments.